Hi, hello everyone. My name is Jennifer West. I am the artistic director of Muse West Concerts, and I am the host of this podcast, Take Note, which today is being recorded on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish nations of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. It is an absolute delight to welcome a very dear friend of mine to our podcast today. And actually, while we're here, we have someone in house who has been editing our podcasts for about a year, Mr. Josh Short. So thank you so much, Josh, for all of your help behind the scenes. His one comment is all of us musicians like to talk a lot. Is that true, Jared?
So for some of us, yeah, some of us know. I like to talk a lot, so this is
And that's why we're friends. Jared is a composer who has very strong ties to British Columbia, but it's been 10 years now. So are you officially a New Yorker?
that's what they say. But if you talk to someone who is actually born and bred in New York, they will probably say differently. Uh, but yeah, they say that if you have lived in New York for 10 years or more, you're officially a New Yorker. So I'm, yeah, I've been here for over 10 years, 11 years.
Wonderful. Um, so I've prepared some questions for our conversation today, but I do want to do some sort of improvisatory questions too, since we're
Oh,
talking
okay.
with the composer. And first of all, this is the first composer we've had on our podcast, so this is very cool. I think that a lot of the time, a lot of classical music content is focused on talking to the performers or conductors. So I think that this is going to be a great conversation. Speaking of New York, what have been some of your inspiring experiences musically in New York? Are there any sort of concerts or opportunities in New York that you've had that are just really memorable that have kind of formed you as a musician?
Well, definitely. I would say I've heard Esa-Pekka Salonen conduct like maybe 4 or 5 times over the years. And every single time he conducts, it doesn't matter if he's conducting a student orchestra or the New York Phil, um, he's just phenomenal at everything that he does. And it's always so special. So like listening to him conduct has always been a real treat for me. Um, I think getting to know a lot of performers and a lot of really high level performers here, and not just build musical relationships, but also friendships with them, has been very inspiring. It's inspiring to see them sort of succeed in their goals as they sort of pursue their careers. So I really, that's very inspiring for me as well.
I
Yeah, and then
definitely
just the
agree.
energy of the city is so inspiring as well. I
Mhm. Me too. I feel like whenever I go to visit New York, it's like being on this constant buzz the whole time. And I sure don't get much sleep when I'm there, but I don't think that's the point. I think it's okay to not sleep in New York and just experience everything and all of the energy. So, one question that I have for my guests that I love the answer to is after a concert, like if your piece is premiered, what's your favorite meal or beverage?
Oh God. Well, it really depends because sometimes you'll have a premiere and then you got the opportunity to maybe meet with the members of the organization at a reception or something, and so you'll you'll get to maybe have wine and some hors d'oeuvres or something like that. It's always really nice to do that. But in situations where I don't have to do that and I can kind of go off on my own, I mean, I love a burger and fries and a beer. That's a big um or well, I had a performance in yeah, last premiere I had an A&W burger in Montreal, which I hadn't had in years because we don't really have A&W in New York. And so I had an Uncle Burger, which is like a teen burger but with a bigger patty, and it was delicious. And then before that, I had a after the New Jersey Symphony played one of my pieces this past summer, I had a there was like a sort of gathering afterwards where there wasn't food and I hadn't eaten dinner yet. So I got back to my hotel and Yeah, I ordered an entire pizza to myself and I
Nice.
ate it in the like on the hotel bed. It was just and watched Netflix. It was so glorious at like midnight. So yeah, like really, really bad junk food.
This is a behind the scenes look, people, at after a concert premiere.
Yeah.
There is a conductor at the New Jersey, I believe she used to be at the New Jersey Symphony, might still be. I believe she's originally from China. Am I correct? What is her name?
I think it was Xinjiang.
She's phenomenal, right?
She is. She wasn't who conducted my piece though. Ludovic Morlot, who used to be with the Seattle Symphony, he was actually conducting, and he did just a phenomenal job on my piece. He's a really incredible conductor and like a really chill, laid back guy too. It was really nice to work with him.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, Here's another sort of off the cuff question. You were composer in residence for the Victoria Symphony for some time, and a lot of major orchestras have a composer in residence. And for this podcast is kind of meant to introduce people to the classical music world, give them some background. What does a composer in residence do? What is their job?
Well, I say it varies from organization to organization. I would say the two main roles, though, are to write music for the orchestra, to be commissioned by that orchestra to write original pieces, and then to serve as somewhat of a contemporary music advisor, where you sort of help the music director. Um, I mean, a lot of music directors are very proactive about understanding new music and knowing what new music is out there. But programming an entire season of music for an orchestra is a huge undertaking, with a lot of logistics concerned. And I mean, it just so happens that sometimes music directors need a little bit of help in that area. And so they'll sort of depend on a composer in residence to help with programming contemporary music and building relationships with living composers and acting almost as a liaison between living composers and the orchestra. So I would say those are the two main roles. When I was with Victoria, I also did some arrangements for different concerts and things. I participated in some educational workshops and helped organize some educational workshops. I curated the New Music Festival, which happened every year. So it was, yeah, it was a great job. It was, really exciting to have that gig while I was a doctoral student. So that was fun.
That's amazing. And I was thinking that that probably is one of the rules is to sort of advise on programming living, breathing composers.
Hopefully everything.
Very breathing, unlike the fellow behind me who's not breathing anymore.
No, that's a picture. That's not a, yeah.
It's true too. The picture and the person in the picture not breathing anymore.
Wait, are we talking about the Phantom of the Opera poster?
No, we're talking about
I
Ludwig.
know, I'm just kidding.
The Phantom might still be alive. That's we're not sure there. um, so one thing I love to know about composers is like what's inspiring you today, musically or like extra musical, extracurricular. Like what's inspiring you?
That's an interesting question because I think there's like this conception that composers and artists will like, suddenly be inspired by something, like they're struck by lightning, and then they just sort of drop everything they're doing and feverishly sort of crank out a piece of music or a piece of art and like don't give up until it's done. That's how art works. And for me, I don't find that's really the case. I find that inspiration is sort of a gradual process that happens over a longer period of time. And I might have a little seed for an idea, but I've sort of found that for me personally, it's not ideal to like dive right in. Sometimes it's ideal to just sort of ruminate on that idea, and really sort of flesh it out a little bit more before I write, because that'll sort of help me think about what I'm going to do a little more strategically. So I'm not necessarily wasting time or energy composing. And then, yeah, in terms of things that are inspiring me, It's really weird. Before the pandemic, I found myself very much inspired by extra musical things. But I guess as we all went into our hermitage of the pandemic, I sort of found myself digging into the music and sound a little more itself rather than extra musical things. So, like, one thing that I'm really interested in right now is where and how sound materializes on a stage and in a space. And so, like, I'm working on two different commissions right now where I'm kind of exploring that idea in different ways and in different manifestations. Um, One of them is a harp concerto for the American harpist Parker Ramsey. And it's sort of a consortium commission with him and several other ensembles around North America, including Vancouver's Standing Wave. Actually, they're participating in this project. And yeah, one thing I'm really interested in is how I can use different types of technology to diffuse the sound of one instrument through another instrument. So you might hear like a harp playing, but it's being actually projected through the body of a timpani, and that changes the resonance of it and the location of where you hear that sound coming from. So that's sort of something that is really interesting me right now in terms of what I'm creating. Yeah.
That's very interesting, actually. And I think that how sound is sort of thought of in space is a whole concept to itself. And something we've been considering is how are we using our performance space?
Mhm.
And more to come on that because that's something I have to really think through a lot. And it is something that we consider because often we have this here's the stage, here's the performers. By the way, they're all wearing concert black.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
Here's the audience, receive the sound, and you are a receiver of sound. And like it's kind of a very traditional model. So it's really interesting to see what's going to come forward after the pandemic because I think a lot of people are rethinking that traditional model of receive sound from the stage, be quiet, and then clap.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's an interesting thing. That's a question that's being sort of reconsidered, and I think a good one to reconsider because I think I mean, in a lot of other genres of music, it's not really the case that there's such a formality to how you receive sound and where you're located when you receive the sound. You just think about like a rock concert or something like that. People aren't sitting in silence receiving the sound. People can sort of get up, they can walk around, they can cheer. I'm not saying necessarily cheer during like the slow movement of a late Schubert sonata or something.
That's a good
But
point. You picked a great example too, where I would, and I'm pretty open to people reacting to music, but I think that would be one example where I'd be like, please don't.
yeah, Schubert.
Please don't.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
so yeah, but I mean, I think that there is sort of room for a little more breaking of those barriers and making it a little more accessible in that way.
Definitely. Yesterday you had a fantastic masterclass, and by masterclass I mean like 5 hours of teaching, or four. It was a long but wonderful afternoon, and I hope you had a good dinner after.
That's it.
Good. And I correct me if I'm wrong. I was kind of in and out. A busy day, and the time change made it a bit awkward. But I believe you told one of the participants that like if it wasn't working with one idea or motive, it's okay to give up an idea, and that composers often feel attached to a certain idea or motive, and that sometimes you just have to drop it. Can you tell me more about that? Because I thought that was amazing advice.
Well, so yeah, like most composers, I think, when they're in a creative process, they'll spend a lot of time developing ideas that they really, really love. And these ideas might be something they love because they sound good or they just have some sort of attachment to them, which is great. but sometimes the ideas that you love as a composer aren't always going to help you move forward in the process of composing a piece. Sometimes, an idea that you love or a passage of music that you love can actually like lead you in a way where you get stuck and you hit a roadblock. And so it's sort of, I mean, there's a lot of different approaches you could take. One could be sort of reconsidering everything that came before that idea you love and just starting with the idea you love and seeing, where you could move this way from it, forwards and backwards. But another thing could be like looking back at what you've written and thinking, okay, maybe I don't need, maybe this piece isn't meant to go to this idea that I love. Maybe I can save this idea I love for another piece. And maybe this piece, well, what would this piece do if I went in this direction? And what would it do if I went in that direction? So it's having a little bit of plasticity to your thinking and to your process. Yeah, because, again, another conception about composers probably sort of perpetuated by the film Amadeus, where you see genius Mozart just without 4 hours. Um,
For sure.
one
The
thing,
best movie ever.
but one thing that's sort of another misconception about a lot of composers is that um, facile quality of writing. Um, the sort of myth that every composer is a genius and you like can just sort of do that and it works that way. It doesn't. You like hit roadblocks. Sometimes the beginning of a process is extremely abstract and actually takes quite a while to get a piece of music in a form where you can actually work on it, writing it the way Mozart did. So yeah, it's just sort of being as elastic as you can with your thinking and your process, and not necessarily digging your heels down too much.
That's right. Well, that leads into my next question actually really nicely is when you hit these roadblocks, how do you push forward artistically when you're like not feeling inspired?
Oh, I mean, I just don't compose.
You just stop composing altogether. You're like, I'm done for the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something to be said about trying to push too hard. Like if you're squeezing a lemon too hard, eventually all the juice is going to come out of it and there's going to be nothing left there and you're just going to be hurting your hands squeezing a juiceless lemon, a juiceless rind, I guess. So I mean, I think that the same can go with composition. Some days it works, some days it doesn't, and you sort of have to, I think, trust your technique. Will build up a really strong technique first, and then trust that your technique will be able to make up for lost time when you do have a good idea or you do have an idea that's working for you. So yeah, like I mean, I find that I rely on my technique in that way a lot, where if there's a week where I'm just not feeling it, I'm not going to compose for a week. And I know that's like a really long time if I'm always constantly trying to meet deadlines. But I also know that if I come back to it and I sort of do see a way forward, I know that I have strong enough compositional technique to sort of, once you have the idea, it's just a matter of putting the work in. And yeah, that all just comes down to compositional technique. So I think giving yourself the freedom to take a step back and try and like live your life a little bit instead of just composing can be very helpful. And then also, yeah, technique. Also trying new things that you're very conscious of what you're trying. Like, I don't know, rolling dice, and every number that you get, that's going to be like represent a certain rhythm, and see what these different combinations of rhythms create for yourself. Sometimes those sorts of experiments will actually lead you to an idea that's very inspiring. And so you get inspired by a process that's not necessarily an inspired process, if that makes sense.
And that's like the aleatory process of composing, if I remember correctly.
That would be chance music.
Yeah.
But aleatory is where you relinquish some control of execution to
Oh,
a
okay.
program. Whereas chance music is where you relinquish control to basically elements that are outside of one individual's control. yeah, like even a step further than aleatory. So, I mean, rolling dice would be chance music. You know, sitting in a silent hall, and every time an audience member coughs, playing a certain note. Like
That would be cacophony in so many ways. It would be everywhere.
maybe would, but like that would be a chance process because nobody really has control over when someone's going to cough, including the people coughing in most cases. So like that's true chance music. Whereas aleatory might be giving a performer like three notes and saying, play these notes at various lengths for the next 10 seconds to create this kind of feeling. Um, yeah, that would be aleatory. You still have some control over the musical material, but you're relinquishing some of it to the performer.
That makes a lot of sense. So, one issue that, well, and it's not a new issue, but I think that our awareness is renewed after so much social unrest during the pandemic and before. Again, the word new, this is not new to certain people, is the issue of like certain groups not being well represented in classical music. And as an organization, one way that we have found that we can sort of counter this is actually by the music we program. It's not just the musicians you hire that represent diversity and equitable policies, but it's actually what are people hearing? And would you, as a composer, would you like to talk about like how can we further address this in our industry? How can we address underrepresentation of marginalized groups in classical music?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, to set some context, classical music certainly has a history of skewing its programming towards essentially white men. That's sort of for hundreds of years, those have been the only people who've been majorly recognized in classical music, save for a couple of example, rare examples. Um, and so, I mean, I think, you know, we're actually really lucky in today's day and age because of some of the progressive initiatives that have sort of occurred over the past decade, that there are actually so many composers from underrepresented backgrounds that are being discovered or have already been discovered, whose music is out there to perform. So I think we're actually quite lucky in that, for the first time, composers who wouldn't normally be getting their time of day are getting their time of day, who are really, truly excellent. And so I think that just overall raises the quality of what different organizations can do in their programming in general. I think, though, the term classical organizations and classical music is a little bit of it's a tricky one in that it comes with a whole lot of expectations and connotations. Um,
It's problematic a little bit, isn't it, as a
well,
label?
it's not necessarily problematic, but like I feel like there are so many artists who, work more within this classical framework who are from underrepresented backgrounds, which is great. But there's even more artists who sort of work in areas that where there's some crossover. I don't mean like crossover, like classical crossover as a genre necessarily, but where they're working in many different genres and many different practices, and they aren't just limited to Western classical music. And so I think that one of the really effective things that some organizations have done is broaden their programming offerings in terms of the types of music they present. And that's really, I think, helping with representation. So like the Los Angeles Philharmonic has been doing that for decades, actually. They've really made their programming something special. And I believe they're one of the only profit-making orchestras in North America. And the San Francisco Symphony recently, they sort of revolutionized how music is programmed by having a curatorial committee rather than just having one music director decide everything. And this curatorial committee isn't just composers or isn't just musicians, but I think there's visual artists there. There's musicians from a variety of different practices. Um, I don't remember exactly who's on the committee, but from what I remember, I believe that it's has a rather diverse makeup as well in terms of people's cultural backgrounds. So I mean, it's things like that which are really starting to revolutionize the field, and this sort of not just working within this classical framework that's proving to be successful for a lot of organizations.
Because how I feel is that me personally, I've had so many blind spots in this area because I started going to classical music concerts when I was about 18, which of course was only last year, right?
Very good.
Actually, I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to be 18 again. Um,
I wouldn't.
no, I don't think I would either. So I feel like even, and I try to have a pretty open mind about these things, but I am still very habituated to this model of overture or contemporary piece, symphony, concerto, or concerto, symphony, and somewhere put an intermission. And I'm used to this format. And like, we're trying to break through that mold a bit. And that the big symphony after the intermission is what you really got to stay for. Or you sit through the first 10 to 12 minutes of contemporary music so you can hear the soloists that you bought the ticket for. And it really keeps perpetuating like not being open-minded.
Well, yeah, I mean, it varies from organization to organization.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not sure what the exact statistics are these days, but from what I understand, I think that most concerts that don't, in orchestral music anyway, most concerts in most organizations that don't have big pieces that would draw a crowd with a concerto with a big soloist that everybody knows, or a big symphony or something like that. A lot of those concerts do unfortunately operate at a loss, or not as much of a profit as they would if they had those big works and those big soloists. So I mean, like the business model of an orchestra, which is what we're talking about right now, I suppose, is challenging because on one hand, it's important to push the model of what it can be, and to be progressive in how you program it. But on the other hand, I mean, you have to pay every musician. You have to operate in such a way that you can keep the organization afloat financially. Um, I won't even get into the politics of donors and board members within organizations that have, quite a bit of power over what might be programmed, either covertly or not covertly. So I mean,
The
like there,
struggle is real.
yeah, there's and but like at the same time, a lot of these um, donors are just kind of amazing people for having that vision of what an organization can be. And there are let's say donors out there who really are interested in in this model being revolutionized. So like there's so many factors that go into programming something like an orchestral concert that make it very complicated to sort of change that in particular. But yeah, it's not impossible. Um, I think that like, a lot of big organizations are able to do things like that because they have such large endowments and so much money that they're just able to operate at a loss if they need to. Um, and they make it up with other events, so it's
That's
not
so true.
a
They
problem.
have like that cushion, the financial cushion.
Yeah, whereas smaller organizations don't necessarily have that, so that's where it can get to be a little complicated. Um, but yeah, I mean, every organization is different, and when I worked with the Victoria Symphony, I thought they did as much as could be done for a smaller organization, a very good job of balancing contemporary music offerings and and more traditional orchestral offerings. So
Mhm.
I felt very lucky to work in an environment with that.
And a beautiful place to be too.
Absolutely.
We are so fortunate to have the generous support of some donors and the SOCAN Foundation to premiere a brand new work for string quartet by you, and it's premiering in 1 week minus an hour and a half. So for our listeners, that is Sunday, October 17th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, um, performed live and recorded live in London by the Ashea Quartet. That's 9 p.m. in the UK. And this piece is very special because it comes out of this incredible time in history that we find ourselves. Would you like to tell us a bit more about Phoenix, your new piece for string quartet?
So, a caveat, when I was writing this piece, I wasn't thinking of any sort of extra musical idea. I really was thinking about just the notes and rhythms and textures and colors and everything in and of themselves. Um, After I finished the piece, though, I sort of looked at it and listened to it and was like, well, this piece sounds kind of cautiously optimistic. And I wrote this piece between March of 2021 of this year and June of this year. And throughout this period, New York, which has been my home for 11 years now, basically had started to come back to life. There was, you know, we were very fortunate to have early access to a lot of the different vaccines that were being approved by the FDA for COVID-19. People were very proactive in getting their vaccines. And so as COVID-19 case rates started to drop in New York, things started to open up again. And New York started to increasingly remind me of the home that I'd lived in for a decade. Um, and so I think, like, even though I wasn't thinking about this when I wrote the piece, I feel like this sense of cautious optimism kind of pervaded my feelings as I was writing it. And so there's sort of a sense of that in the music. And I chose the name Phoenix because the phoenix is a mythical bird that, rises from the ashes, blossoms into this beautiful bird and then explodes into fire and rises from the ashes again. It's sort of this rebirth concept. So I couldn't really think of a title more fitting than Phoenix for a piece like this. And yeah, I dedicated the piece to all of the scientists and frontline workers who sort of made this vaccine possible and made it possible for, for us to have a semblance of normal life here in New York.
And the Met Opera's open again.
Yeah, I haven't gone back yet, but I should.
And it's just so incredible to to have been watching a city that is so dear to my heart. Some of the people I care about most live there, and to watch like 17 months ago and see no one on the streets was the strangest experience. To watch this on the news and to know that people living in such close quarters are so at risk for COVID, and to see outdoor dining now flourishing. Washington Square is full. Soho is full. People are still going to brunch in Tribeca.
Yeah, we like our brunch.
All the things.
No, but I mean, like, a caveat on all of this, though, I wish that in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, people who have access to the vaccine were taking it more seriously. And people who don't have access to the vaccine did have access to the vaccine, because I think that's a major issue now. And, if we in sort of first world countries don't sort of invest in getting vaccines to people who don't have vaccines right now, there's going to be more variants that develop of COVID, and it's just going to continue to snowball and snowball. So, I do hope that companies and governments with the resources at their disposal start to really focus on this as a global issue. And of course, people within these developed nations who have access to the vaccine continue to get vaccinated if they're not vaccinated. Um, yes.
That is so true. Louder for the people in the back in Alberta.
Not saying anything.
I'm from there, so I can say
I mean, yeah, yeah. We don't have to talk about that.
it. I'll get myself in trouble live on air here. That's okay though. We love to close our interview with a few quick questions. Well, this one might not be quick, and then we'll have some quick fun questions. You did such a fantastic job yesterday of teaching. And what I noticed is that you made every composition student feel welcome, and you gave them encouraging feedback, and you used like a questioning method. You always asked them questions and made them be curious. In your experience, what makes a great composition teacher?
Um, I think, I've had like four major composition teachers, all of whom have been very different from one another. And I think that you as a composer obviously develop from your own creative exploration, creative practice as a composer. But I mean, there's different things you can glean from different teachers that are very helpful. Um, and so yeah, there's not like one thing that makes a composition teacher great, but I'd say one who can sort of help you reframe how you think about a composition can be very helpful. Um, I think one who teaches you technique, whatever that is, can be helpful. Um, yeah, I mean, those sorts of things can be very helpful coming from a composition teacher. There's specific things that I think certain teachers of mine passed on to me, which were very helpful, but maybe like not as applicable generally. Like for instance, Steve Chapman at UBC, I feel like he taught me almost everything I ever learned about orchestration in like a year and a half of studying with him, which is pretty insane in a good way. So yeah, like different composers teach different things. John Corigliano taught me how to think about the architecture of a piece of music and how a musical narrative can unfold in an interesting way. So yeah, so like it runs the gamut, I think.
That's
Studying
amazing.
with one person though, I think is an important thing to do.
Absolutely. Same with all musical instruments, for sure. So we like to end with a rapid round of like rapid fire questions.
Oh,
So you have to answer the first word or phrase that comes to your mind. And your favorite opera is?
La Traviata.
Oh, you knew that one pretty quickly. And your favorite symphony by Beethoven is?
7.
Good answer. And if you had to pick between Mozart or Beethoven, it would be?
Impossible.
It would be impossible.
Yeah, they're so different. Why is it a comparison?
That's true. Wonderful. And last rapid fire question. If you didn't play piano, you would play?
Clarinet.
Such a great instrument.
I love the clarinet.
So cool.
Actually,
So cool.
I did clarinet in high school band for a second. I like the clarinet.
For a hot second, you were a clarinet player?
I mean, I wasn't a good clarinet player, but I played the clarinet.
There you go. That's great. Again, I'm so grateful to have my dear friend, and our guest today on our podcast is composer Jared Miller, who we think pretty officially is a New Yorker. 11 years, you get your badge of New York honor. And our next performance features a world premiere by composer Jared Miller, and it is the Ashea String Quartet on Sunday, October 17th at 1 p.m. And it will be on YouTube and will be available for everyone to watch at no cost. And we hope everyone tunes in to hear this beautiful new piece of music. And we encourage everyone to just check out a new music concert in your city, somewhere people are doing new music.
Yeah.
Jared is nodding in agreement. So thank you so much, Jared. Do you have any messages for our audience before the premiere?
Oh, no, I mean, thank you so much for having me, Jen, of course. And yeah, I definitely encourage everyone to come and check out the premiere of my piece. And I believe there's a Haydn string quartet on the program as well. So yeah, and yeah, just enjoy it. Um, yeah, that's all I can say. But
Thank you so much.
thank you to NewsWest and all of the sponsors and the SOCAM Foundation for making this project possible. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. And with that, I would like to thank our tech sponsor, Tonley Music, our podcast editor, who